The time is now to start a journey to find true freedom. Break the chains. Become God's best. This is Freedom Quest with Terry Baxter.
This is that picture of what takes place, and it was taking place at this time, but in the end times, and a number of things that she was into, seducing people into, included not only alcohol and sensuality and trades of all kinds of things, but something comes out toward the end of this chapter, and it's actually in verse number 13. And I'll say today we've got a huge rise of just human trafficking.
Yes.
For a lot of different things. But I want to read some of the things that it says that they got involved in the end times. Verse 12, and I'm in Revelation chapter 18. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, every kind of kitron wood, every attribute of ivory, basically every article made from very costly wood and bronze and whatnot. Then verse 13. And cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses, chariots. And you look at that and say, well, that's just good trade. That's the World Trade Center. But listen to the last two items.
Yep.
And slaves and human lives. Under the radar of what takes place within, I'm going to say, the kingdom of darkness, there's a ton of human slavery. There's a lot of human trafficking taking place. And I'll say that even in the state capitol, when I was down serving as a state representative, we started peeling the peels of the onion back on this thing and discovering not only for sex trade, but also in some of the more diabolical senses with children and very young children in different ones of these cult, and I'm going to say occult groups. There was some tragic things taking place with children. Yes. Tragic things. And it leaves them scarred for life.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Scarred for life.
Absolutely.
Yep.
One of the things that in our research of this, and we have a dear friend, her name is Lisa, and she was the victim of satanic ritual abuse by her parents, her father in particular. One of the questions was, why do they do this? And it was Satan promises people all kinds of things if they do these rituals. Demonic power is supercharged through ritual. Voodoo, witchcraft, all cultic practices are the same because it comes from the same source, the devil himself. And unfortunately, the younger the child and the physical characteristics of the child, if they're blonde hair and blue-eyed, they have very specific uses for very specific rituals.
Yeah.
You wonder, how in the world can this happen? And it's just one bite of a piece of fruit that wasn't meant to be eaten. And here we are. Yeah. And did he lose control when that happened? Was he like, oh no, Trinity, now what do we do? Plan B? No. Thank the Lord, no. He's right in Genesis chapter 3 is the gospel.
Yep.
That's Jesus coming to save his people from their sins.
I want to mention the effects on the SRA victim. Victims need safety before memories come out. Then it's crash and burn, coping mechanisms and self-medicating. Many mental problems can occur, like bipolar and schizophrenia. The root cause for some of these people is SRA. They get misdiagnosed, and then when they heal, they'll be fine, but self-harm, suicidal ideations, cutting, financial instability, homelessness are huge in the SRA community. You can find many survivors who are homeless because of the constant fear, torment, chaos, confusion that they continually live in. How do they become homeless? The victims will eventually be forced to do things they don't want to do, turning them into perpetrators. For example, if they put a knife in a child's hand and the child is not allowed to say no, some kids fight it, some kids don't. During these times of grooming, the adults are picking up on who's going to be compliant and who's fighting. For the kids who can't do those things, so the kids who refuse in spite of their age, they know it's not right, they get abused more. So the ones who give in, they get less of a beating basically and less abuse, but the ones who don't get worse. For the kids who get out, they get targeted for life, they can get blacklisted for jobs, have continual financial troubles, many times leading to homelessness. And the result of the grooming is waves of functionality. They get terror of God, mistrust of people, fear of crowds, humanizing animals, which is interesting because I have quite a few friends who are victors, I should say, not victims, and they humanize animals a lot. Complex PTSD, gender confusion, homosexuality, fear and dread holidays of birthdays. Birthdays are the worst holiday for a victim. You would think it would be Halloween, and it is. It's really horrific. But there's something that they do with birthdays, and they do rituals that make the victim even more scared on that day in particular.
So what are some of the mental games that they'll play with their victims so they don't disclose what happened to them if they are conscious of it? There's obviously a lot of things that take place in that as well.
Yeah, you'll come across a lot of gaslighting. That couldn't have happened. People don't do that. There's no way. You're making stuff up. And then they'll start trying to take them to a psychologist. And then it's unfortunate, but a lot of counselors and psychologists are not taught about this. They don't believe it exists because of that term, satanic panic. They were taught that in the 90s, there's a term, a bunch of people came forward and said they were victims of a ritual abuse. They're not telling the truth. So most counselors and psychologists, there's some that do believe, but there's some that don't. And the ones who do believe, most of them can't handle counseling a victim because it's too traumatic for the counselor to hear about. So where do victims go?
Yeah, and I'm going to throw this out. This happens around us, but it's under the radar to the point where most people will say, this is unbelievable.
Right.
I can't believe this stuff is actually happening in the United States, in our communities,
Right.
In our neighborhood. One of the interesting things that I've discovered as far as finding people that are becoming very aware of it is law enforcement.
Right.
Many of our law enforcement officers and agencies now are doing some substantial training in this stuff, not only with human trafficking. And we often think of human trafficking along the terms of either slave labor, where they've got sweatshops and they're putting these people to work that are producing goods and whatnot. That happens constantly in other countries, unfortunately also in our own country as well. And also sex trafficking,
Right.
For sexual pleasure, favors, or that kind of thing. But I hear you suggesting that within some of these, orders or communities or whatnot,
Yeah.
they're trafficking lives to do ceremonies against them and actually to maybe appease Satan with ceremonies with people.
Yes. Yep. The friend that we were referring to, the one who was trafficked through the Bible college, she started an investigation with a Midwest state, I should say, with a detective. The detective believed her, went to go interview all of her siblings, interviewed her parents. Something happened, though, because suddenly he just got transferred to another state with no explanation. And whoever was above him told the sisters, my friend and her sisters, cases dropped. That was no explanation. And the only thing that they could come up with as they learned about, fraternal orders, there's fraternal order of police, Freemasons, her dad being a Freemason, they have to cover for one another. So if another person got the case and is a Freemason, they have to drop it. And we'll get into that later, but there's a lot of pledges they take of secrecy. They also take pledges that they will protect their brother against anything. And if they do not, they will be tortured and killed. These are Mason level, ceremonies. They start taking these pledges in step one. So the very first stage, they're taking this step. So if you get a police officer or a chief or someone who's taken that step and comes across a father who's abused his daughter, if that father's a Freemason and does the little hand signal, by obligation, the police officer has to drop it. They have to cover, or they will be killed. It's sick.
Now, I just want to touch on one step further. We know that there's a lot of our illegal immigrants, especially children that have been trafficked into the United States, have disappeared.
Yep.
That's come out very candidly in the past couple of years. One of the things we realize is Homeland Security has just lost track of them. And I'm not talking about hundreds, I'm talking about thousands. There's no record as to where they are.
Yep.
The question is, what happened to them?
Right.
Where are they? What are we dealing with? Could there really be something this diabolical taking place here in the United States. And I appreciate you mentioned the abortion industry because, that's been millions of innocent babies that have been killed. But, I look at this and I almost say, well, I never see it happen around me. You got to be kidding. Right. But the question is, where are they? What's happened?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things just in the political realm, and this is why it was so God appointed that he put you where he put you for that period of time. Because look what happened in just a short number of years afterwards with Roe versus Wade. And it's discouraging when you hear fellow believers say that Christians should have nothing to do with politics. No, we should have everything to do with politics. We need born-again Christ followers getting in to bring a country to its knees in repentance and to following the laws of the Lord Jesus. This is just an example of a mayor that needed something passed in his town. And this is according to a former Satanist. His name is Michael Hickborn, who grew up Baptist, and with another fellow, his name is Zachary King, another former Satanist. And we do have a resource sheet with some resources on the desk over there. One of the things that this fellow Satanist, Michael Hickborn, he would get called into an abortion clinic. If the mayor of this particular town needed legislation passed but couldn't, he would call the Satanist and the bill would get passed because of a ritual. In one instance, the one asking for the spell was the mayor of the town. He came to us because he wanted to pass some ordinance for his town. He had tried it 2 or 3 times and it never went through. He had been a member of the coven for quite some time. The mayor had. He had tried every legal avenue to get this law through, and it never worked. So he got someone to agree to have an abortion if it were to happen at our satanic coven during a night where we could go do the abortion and do the spell at the same time. Generally, in a small town coven, which is what it was, everyone would show up to the event. In a bigger place, like when I was a member of the World Church of Satan, you get the high wizard. The people who want their spell to take place would be there. There would be the abortion doctor and his nurse, many times at high-profile abortion facilities. And there's a lot of them because a lot of the people that work at these places are witches or Satanists. So you will get a lot of the people that are willing to participate in the satanic event.
Yeah. And you probably saw this on the news within the last 2 years, but when Roe versus Wade was overturned, went back to the States, did you guys all see the Satanic Temple start stepping forward and saying, we're going to start providing abortions because it's a religious ceremony? Backed up totally what he just read. To them, it is a religious right that you can't take from them. Because shedding of blood, they're mocking Christ, the shedding of blood, forgiveness of sin, right? They say shedding of blood means power for us. We can get the bill passed. We can get a financial contract. We've talked to former Freemasons who lost everything when they left the Freemason Lodge because they had been getting contracts, tons of money. This is in the state of Iowa. And when they got out, they're with the power, they're with the money.
When you're dealing with an ungodly, wicked world and some of the things that happens, for me as a Christian, it is unconscionable.
Right.
And I don't want to make it sound like all churches are involved in this.
Right.
It's relatively few.
Right.
Some of our first experiences years ago with trying to rescue children out of human trafficking and teenagers, and it happened actually in the state of Minnesota that I was involved in trying to do some rescue. One of the areas where a lot of kids got inducted was a church in Minneapolis, and the church was just a front. And I got to say that. It's not that they're a genuine Christian church the way we think of. It was a front behind which a lot of kids would come that were runaways to get help, and the help they got, unfortunately, put them in a very tragic situation. But for the victim, when it's done in the name of a church, in the name of God, the scars left on their life last a long time. A long time. And we were able to track down that one particular church that was doing that trafficking, and it was, it wasn't a legitimate church the way we think of it, but it was a front, and they were working under that name.
Well, did you want to talk about the statistic with how many people are victims?
Oh my goodness, yes. This was a stat done by the Cult Awareness Network, and Lisa Meister said it's okay to use her name. is the one that speaks on this quite adamantly. Many churches, and we thank the Lord for her as well, because she is making churches aware of this, pastors, church leaders. This needs to be not only known, but believed and accepted, and for these men of God, fellow men of God, to get equipped in how to minister to these folks. 2% of people in the United States have experienced satanic ritual abuse that they know of. 2%. So out of 340,111,000 people here in the U.S., that comes down to 6,802,220.
It's a lot.
Break this down into the church. 1 out of every 50 people in a church have been satanically ritually abused. Our church is between 300 to 400, so we're looking at between 6 to 8 people. We know of 4 in our church.
And I just got to ask this question. You're not saying that they were abused by that church, but they're attending that church, but in their past, they have been victims of this.
Absolutely.
And as Christians working with survivors, we've got to be able to, number one, believe them,
Right.
but offer healing, offer a place for assimilation and love and whatnot to them. Is that what I understand?
Yes. And like Janet said, and this is not a knock on the counseling industry at all, the Christian counselors. This is not a... Before we knew about this whole topic, it is beyond a mind block. And yeah, there are some things that the human mind is not capable of being able to comprehend. However, the compassion, because of the Trinity dwelling in us, like Jesus says in John 14, we will make our home with you, the we, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There is hope, and there is life, and there is truth. And those who the Son has set free are free indeed.
Yep.
And so, all this to say is that it is essential that church leaders get into the game willfully. And like Terry had mentioned last evening, I'm in a group of pastors. I love these guys. And after I'd mentioned, there's about 8 different churches that get together, 8 different pastors from different churches. We get together, about 8 to 10 of us, once a month. And I mentioned about Terry's free request. And one of the pastors, oh yeah, we had Terry here as well. Fantastic. And 2 of the pastors said, so is this experiential or is this biblical? So I started explaining. And he said, well, it's not in the Bible. I'm not going to believe it. It has to be in the Bible. I'm just like, brother, no.
Yeah. If there's a victim in that church, I guarantee you they will not come forward.
Yes.
And I just want to throw this out. We're here at a spiritual warfare symposium, and these are things we do not cover during the workshop. When we go through the spiritual warfare workshop, we're going through the biblical basis of spiritual warfare in general. What we're doing here is basically opening the subject up for those who are starting to work more and more in ministering to people, helping people who are coming from trauma, from different things, maybe experiencing what you'd call some activity in their life. And one of the areas that can be related to is having been a past victim of SRA. And this is an area that myself, I don't really work with. I don't spend time with SRA survivors doing active ministry. I usually hand them over to some very gifted Christian counselors and psychologists who do this as a ministry. But as a pastor and as someone in this, I'm able to acknowledge that this area exists and I see it out there. And when I encounter people who are dealing with bigger, deeper issues emerging from this than what I'm equipped to deal with, then I'll refer them on to someone that was really well-versed and equipped to deal with this. And I have not made a practice in our ministry of ministering in depth. Over the years of ministry, my wife and I have encountered, I'm going to say about 5 or 6 survivors of SRA. And many of them display a lot of similar symptoms, and we're going to hear a little bit about that in a moment. And what our goal has been is to provide a safe environment for them to be loved on, to know that we understand them, we're not going to reject or shun them because they have some issues going on, and that we believe them, that we believe them and the struggles they're going through, but then we work to refer them to someone who can really help them work through these issues and find a way to come to recovery. And what we're doing with this particular subject in this time is just opening up and saying, you may be dealing with people on the parameter of your church who are survivors. They've got areas in their life that are very broken, very hard to understand. They might be going through some characteristics and behaviors that you're standing back and saying, what is it with this person? I want nothing to do with them. You may possibly be dealing with a survivor that needs to be loved and accepted in Jesus' name, and you've got to work to find someone who can help them work through their issues. And that can be very big. And what we want to do, this is kind of the introduction to SRA, what it is it out there, is it real? And the scope of it, I'm not even sure of. I know it's bigger than what most of us think. It's a reality today. I would say it's growing today.
It's actually bigger than like the drug trade. Because if you think about it, if you saw the movie Taken, you get a girl, and that person who's trafficking her can make more money on one woman than they can if they have to go out and deal drugs. They use them and use them and use them, keep them drugs sometimes, and they're gonna make a ton of money. I don't know if you guys have seen like YouTube videos where right in broad daylight, someone will just come along and try to snatch a kid with the father present, which that blows my mind, because that's really brave. That's the word I'll use. But when I start looking at those videos, I think 20, 30 years ago, we never saw that. But what changed, there's big money. There is big money, so the risk is worth it for the person. They might get paid. I'm not saying I know the amount for sure, but if you're looking at 20 or 30 grand for one kid to hand them over, that's a big payday versus selling some cocaine or, that's not a big payday, but selling a child is.
And it's happening all around us.
Yeah.
And the manifestations are in different ways. And we need to be praying about this. Yeah. We got to pray for our country. We've got to pray also for the perpetrator to come to Christ, and for Jesus to work in that environment as well. Now, let me make an observation, then I'm going to shift gears and we're going to get into the next session and hear a bit of a story. I've discovered as a pastor, the times that I've worked with survivors, there's a huge demand for emotional help and support. And they're usually very needy people.
Right.
And I'm going to say it this way, and I hope I can say this right. They're energy takers and not energy givers. They can just burn out your schedule. They can just wear you down because there's no end to the need for love and affirmation and acceptance and understanding. And because of that, we've discovered that it's important within the churches that I pastor to get a network of informed people and bear the burden together.
Right.
And it's not always a burden, it is a blessing. But I just want to emphasize that survivors are so broken that they can wear you out.
Right.
They can really wear you out. And if you're unaware of what you're dealing with, it's not just someone that's highly needy. It can be someone who has been deeply abused in a ritualistic way, and the scars are very deep. But there's good news. Jesus can not only save and heal and set free, but it's usually a process. Right. And I just want to throw this out to you, and I'm not going to steal your thunder from later, but when I deal with someone who's basically demon-possessed, and I'm interacting with that spirit, we can see deliverance come very quickly. It can be immediate. They're set free, the spirit's gone, and normality returns rather quickly. When we're dealing with a survivor of SRA, it can be in terms of months and years of working back to a healthy life and understanding all the stuff they've gone through and the garbage that's been there. We're dealing with, I'm going to say right now, one SRA survivor where the entrance into the abuse was through hypnotism, where a hypnotist had done some things, and while this woman was hypnotized, there's all kinds of sexual, atrocity perpetrated against her. And there are some words that he would say, and all of a sudden she'd come out of it without any memory of what took place. And this happened during her college years. And now it's a woman that's in my age bracket, just slightly younger than me, her and her husband. And they're starting to discover the depth of the repressed memories and stuff she is dealing with. And they'll be sitting watching, for example, a TV show, and someone will use a series of words on the TV show, which happen to be what the hypnotist used, and boom, all of a sudden, she goes silent, locks up, or goes in a trance state. And what's happening, it's just coming back and just using those similar words. So I just want to, is my microphone kind of on the blitz here?
Battery. Oh, you want to, here, go ahead.
And I just want to throw that out to you, that it can come back with symptoms in many different ways and different aspects as you start working with this. So how does this affect you? How does this affect you in your ministry, in your church, your small groups, and those kinds of things? Just be aware that when very highly needy people come along, you might be dealing with something a little bit more than meets the eye.
Right. Is it not working either? Try this way.
Try this one.
Let's try again. So how does this affect you in your ministry? Just be aware that when some people come along and they're highly needy, you might be dealing with something pretty deep and big in their past. And it does take some love, some amazing understanding, some compassion, and just work with them through this. And that's just very powerful. So,
and just to add with that too, it's okay and it's godly and it's God honoring to add boundaries.
Yeah, to have boundaries.
To have and hold those boundaries, hold them in love, but have boundaries. Otherwise, it will consume your life.
Yeah.
And I've often had a policy when I'm working with a survivor, and my wife and I get to know a survivor, of communicating very clearly with them. You know, they've been shunned by so many churches. Yes. They've been looked at as being so weird and so different that they can't find a place to go, and they're often left alone and isolated. And that's the last thing that they need. Right. And to find a community of believers that can embrace them and love on them, and yet set boundaries for yourself. And setting boundaries for yourself is not only an important thing when it comes to working with an SRA survivor, it deals with anybody who's traumatized or who is involved in some of these activities, because they can wear you out, and it is important to set boundaries.
I just want to say, just wanted to say the dissociative identity disorder, when he said if you come across someone and you're just like, there's something a little more, and that might not necessarily be SRA, it could be any type of trauma. Because as Dr. Dickinson explained to us, DID is basically a system of how you cope with something that's too traumatic for the person to deal with. It could be a bad car accident, it could be a rape, it could be something very severe enough to cause the mind to shut down. And layman's terms way to describe it, and I'm not a counselor, so don't take this as gospel truth, but from what I understand, the memory, what happens is the trauma happens, the brain starts perceiving it, and it'll go into one of two. Is this going in and out? Okay. But it'll go in one of two areas. It'll go into a recall state where the person can recall that trauma, or if it's, depending on what's happening, it will go into an amnesic state. Dr. Dickinson has worked with many counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and he said the memory is never gone. It just could be in an amnesic area, and he knows all the anatomy terms for it. So,
and any kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome can bring out similar symptoms in people.
Right.
When the Iron Curtain came down, I started dealing with people who had been in POW camps or under communism tremendously abused, and they dealt with a lot of these same symptoms. Right. So what we're going to do here, we're going to take a break and try to get the microphone straightened out. So let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and move into the next session.